From WisPolitics in Madison, you're listening to Capitol Chats.
Hello, everybody. This is Kate Morton, a reporter with WisPolitics.com, here with my colleague Adam Kellenhofer, who recently did an interview with Department of Corrections Secretary Kevin Carr. So, Adam, what did you talk about?
Hi, Kate. Yeah, so a lot of what we talked about centered around the Department of Corrections budget priorities, and many of their budget priorities actually focus on addressing the staff vacancy issue at state prisons, which are reaching beyond 50% at some prisons right now. We also got to talk a little bit about some of the capital budget projects, especially focusing on juvenile prisons. So let's just jump right into it. Thank you very much, Secretary Kevin Carr, for joining me on today's Capitol Chats podcast. It is a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me, Adam.
All right, so it is budget season right now, which means there are a lot of Joint Finance Committee hearings. You testified before the Joint Finance Committee very recently and made some pretty big asks, especially surrounding staff vacancy rates. Staff vacancy rates at a lot of state prisons have been quite high for quite a long time, even before you became Secretary of Department of Corrections. But there are quite a few prisons. There are a few prisons right now that are at about a 50% vacancy rate. So what are you trying to do to address that issue?
Well, one of the things that we've done is, with the help of the legislature and Governor Evers, we raised the compensation rate for starting pay at our maximum security facilities to about $31 to $32 an hour. We did that over a year ago. And despite having increased compensation to that level for starting pay at a maximum security facility, we still have a high rate of vacancies at those maximum security facilities, which indicates to me that we haven't found the sweet spot of compensation that will interest people in applying for and filling those vacancies.
So have you had any success lobbying Republicans on the Joint Finance Committee to approve, continuations of those pay bumps?
Well, the governor's request in his requested budget for compensation at the Department of Corrections in the Division of Adult Institutions includes some significant pay increases, along with the continuation of what was instituted as add-ons. And these add-ons were specific amounts of money that were added onto the base rate of pay for starting employees, depending on where they would end up working. So, in summary, the governor's request is that we increase the base rate of compensation up to about $33 an hour starting, and continue the add-ons depending on if you work at a maximum security facility or not. In addition to those things, and to digress to your earlier question, what are we doing to address the vacancy issue? We are on social media, we're on radio, we're on TV. In fact, yesterday I heard one of our ads on the Brewers game on the radio, okay? We're using billboards, we're using social media, we're doing mail delivery. We've hired a marketing company that specializes in hiring folks in public safety positions. We've done everything that we can possibly think of to try to attract folks to the Department of Corrections. And the other thing is we've raised compensation.
All right, so I have actually seen the Department of Corrections ads on the Bucks games pretty regularly. So do you think those ads and the marketing efforts and the pay bumps, is that going to be enough to really reduce the vacancy rates to a more manageable level, say before, I don't know, say in like 3-4 years or so? Or what is the timeline for kind of trying to reduce those vacancy rates? When do you think it'll be in a more manageable level?
Well, that's hard to say, Adam, because when I became the secretary in January of 2019, the vacancy rate at the Department of Corrections in DAI was 17%. That's awful high. But the Department of Corrections historically has had a difficult time with vacancy rates prior to our administration coming into office. Since then, the average vacancy rate throughout the Division of Adult Institutions has risen to about 33%. Now, there's a number of reasons for that. The economy certainly impacts government just like it impacts the private sector. We all know that there are a high number of vacancies throughout the private sector in every category that you can look at. Now, with that being said, the unemployment rate in this state has never been lower. So people that want to work can find work. There are 2 jobs available for every 1 person that's looking. People have choices. What we have to do at the Department of Corrections and in state government is make people want to choose us.
Yeah. Okay. So I kind of want to switch gears here a little bit, still sticking with budget priorities, but going over to the capital budget. In Governor Evers' capital budget, he included funding for new juvenile facilities, which, juvenile prisons in Wisconsin has been a hot topic for years now with Lincoln Hills and Copper Lake. There is the new proposed site in Milwaukee to replace Lincoln Hills, but in that capital budget, there are 2 additional juvenile facilities. What can you tell me about those 2 other juvenile facilities? Is that a really big push for DOC right now, or do you think that one facility in Milwaukee is going to be enough?
No, I think that the additional facilities that the governor is requesting in our capital budget are critical to us being able to envision the goals of Act 185, which was passed in 2017, which was to close Lincoln Hills as a juvenile facility. Without having the additional facilities that the governor is requesting, it's going to be difficult, if not impossible, to close Lincoln Hills as quickly as folks would like. Let's remember, the facility in Milwaukee is designed to hold 32 youth. We have almost double that number in custody up at Lincoln Hills at this time. So at a minimum, we're going to need to have a second, if not a third facility in order to certainly close Lincoln Hills. And that was what was always intended by Act 185 anyway. It was, when it was passed, it was envisioned that there would be 3 Type 1 juvenile facilities strategically located around the state, along with several county-run facilities that would create a statewide plan so that the concept of keeping youth closer to home, where they have more access to family and community and other services that were helpful to their reentry into their communities, were located. So we're simply trying to follow the direction, if you will, of the legislature when they created the act by requesting these additional facilities.
Yeah. And I've been tracking that population at Lincoln Hills since I started this job, which, as you said, this issue has actually predated my work in covering state issues. But I've seen that population actually go down quite a bit throughout the years. What do you think is driving that decrease? And is that the direction we want to go?
Well, first of all, I think what's happening is that as the cost of sending folks to Lincoln Hills has increased, a number of counties have identified other alternatives to deal with their juvenile issues locally. And that's not a bad thing. I do believe that, there has to be multiple tools in the toolbox so that you can provide the specialized level of treatment that each youth needs. And so I think that more local options are in the end a good thing.
All right, got it. So last question, I want to touch on something that you brought up during that Joint Finance Committee hearing. A lot of the Republicans brought up this master's facility plan, which is a contentious issue for sure. But a lot of Republicans have advocated to kind of get rid of Green Bay Correctional, which is a fairly old facility. It was built in the late 1800s. And your response, I thought, was really, really interesting, and that the Evers administration doesn't really have an appetite to increase bed capacity at DOC. But any kind of talks about building new facilities would have to come with some sort of criminal justice reform. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of reform would be, what kind of talks are we talking about?
Well, first of all, the master facilities plan makes several recommendations, and among them was the recommendation to consider building a 1,600 bed maximum security facility. At that time, the cost was estimated to be close to $500 million, and that was in 2019. I can only guess that it would easily approach $700 to $800 million today. Now, with that being said, our administration has no appetite to increase the number of beds that we have in our system, but I believe that the governor would be open to discussions about, replacing a couple of old facilities with a newer one that didn't increase our overall footprint as far as the number of beds. But in order to do that, you have to have some legislated comprehensive criminal justice reform, the same types of reforms that have happened in states like Texas, where over the course of 10 years, they closed 10 prisons. In Michigan, Oklahoma, Louisiana, South Carolina, there's a number of states that have engaged in comprehensive criminal justice reform that was smart and thoughtful, that reduced the cost of prisons, lowered populations, which enabled them to close some of their prisons, and maintain public safety. Those all sound like pretty good ideas to me. But we don't have to do the things that everybody else did. We can create a Wisconsin model, a model that works for the state of Wisconsin, that accomplishes those same objectives and produce better outcomes for those who happen to be imprisoned in the state of Wisconsin.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that answer. And thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was a pleasure to have you on. And I hope you have a good rest of your week.
Thank you, Adam. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Bye.
Bye.
Well, Adam, thanks for sharing that interview. And it'll be interesting to see how these budget priorities kind of shake out and if there's any opportunities for bipartisan agreement.
Yeah, and it'll be really interesting to see when Lincoln Hills will actually close. So if our listeners want to read more about anything to do with the Department of Corrections, they can head over to our website at wispolitics.com. But for now, I'm Adam Kellenhofer.
I'm Kate Morton.
Thanks for listening to WisPolitics Capital Chats, brought to you by Spectrum.